Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha Mirabal with Melco's application team, and I'm back again to see what questions you might have to get them answered. Um, if you have questions while we're live, go ahead and type in on the comments. We're live on both YouTube and Facebook, so if there's anything you want to talk about, be sure to type it in, and I'll try my best to get them answered, or if we can, if at all possible. I do have some questions ahead of time. If you do have questions between sessions, you can always email them to applications@melco.com. And, if it's something simple, we can reply back. Or if you want to see it talked about in one of our sessions, we'll add that to our list. All right. So I'll go ahead and get started with the questions I had from before. So these few were sent in on the applications email. So one of them was, hey, good morning, Lorena. Beautiful in Alaska. It's hot as always here. I love it. In Florida. um, excuse me. All right, so how do I see all the fonts available in DesignShop? So let's go over to DesignShop. Reminder, if you see me looking off to the other side, that is where my other monitor is, where I can see the questions. So what I always say to do for getting the fonts is I always save it off as a PDF, so then I can email that PDF to all my clients. So how do you go about doing that? First, open up DesignShop. Okay, so start there. When you get there, I usually just right click on this lettering icon. Okay, so move your mouse over the A, right click, and that will bring up your object property box. Now from here, you see this, you can print selected, and print selected will just do the code sheet for that. And what do I mean by code sheet? These things that fly out are the code sheets, what I'm calling code sheets anyway. All right, so if you go and click on print all, you can actually save it to a PDF, at least my computer you can. And when you do that, it creates a file that I just opened up here rather than watching my computer chug and save it off. But it saves all of these code sheets as a PDF that you can then email to your clients, right? So, or print it out, put it in a book, whatever makes you happy. But that way you have all the different fonts, their size recommendations, so the recommended min and max size. So your clients have that, as well as what characters are included. So you can see this one includes all the special characters down here. Some of the fonts, particularly the older ones, don't include all the different characters, so that's another thing to consider. Some are all caps fonts, things like that. So you can see that all in these PDFs. So again, how you would do that is just, open up your property box, go print all under the lettering tab, and then just do file save as and tell it to save as a PDF. Okay, so that's how you can get all the fonts for review and preview. All right, what else do we have? Oh, a question. Can we make chenille patches with my Bravo? Forgot to mute my phone. Sorry. Okay, so can we make this? Yes, you can. Now, how you would do that is, first off, there's a really good video that Nate's got. They put together that goes over how to do micro chenille, from the digitizing to everything. It's a good 30-45 minute video. We will get you that link posted, but there's a video there. Also, if you go to the Melco service site, and we'll get you this link as well, there's a section in there that has sample designs. It's got the teddy bear, it's got the styles, it's got a PDF that goes through all the different properties and things like that. So there are a lot of good resources with how you would do this. Now, overall, how do you do that? How do you make this particular one as a patch? Well, how I would start with it is just get it digitized as if it were flat fill. And once you get it digitized, then worry about changing all the properties to make it chenille appropriate after that. So if I go to DesignShop, Lorena, you asked to follow up on the fonts. Does that do all the fonts or just the one that is listed? Print all will do all the fonts. Print selected will do the only currently selected font. Okay, so print all prints every code sheet. For the embroidery fonts, it's not going to do all your true type fonts. Okay. All right, so let me go open up. Let's open up my teddy bear. Okay. I'll open up a few different ones. All right, so the key with when you're digitizing for micro chenille is first off, like I said, what I would do is just digitize whatever design you want, and kind of personally, I just ignore all the properties. So just get it digitized, trace your shapes, add stitch directions, that sort of thing. But then there are some things that have been set up, some styles for you that make it really simple to go ahead and change this to be chenille appropriate. So when you go into the properties, now in the FAQ on micro chenille, there is this style, and where to save it is already there, but you'll see there's this Bermalana chenille and there's a firefighter chenille. So one of the things that makes that gives you that look is going to be your thread. Using a polyester thread that's really shiny isn't going to give you the same look. So Bermalana is kind of like sewing with yarn. It's a pretty thick and heavy thread. But that's what's closest to what a chenilling machine would do, right? Your firefighter thread is another really good option because it's matte. It is a little bit costly, but it's a thinner thread and it's still matte, so it sews pretty nicely. The frosted matte would be worth playing around with as well, but the thing to keep in mind with that particular thread, it's really thin. The standard frosted matte is thinner than a 40 weight thread. So trying to create a chenille look, that's not ideal. You want to go with thicker threads. Okay. So once you have your shape digitized, so let's say this was just a plain flat fill, right? So what you'd want to do is select it, double click on it, right click and go to properties. And then you come over to the styles thing, change your styles to the appropriate chenille and hit apply. That's going to change all the different properties to be appropriate for what a chenille design would sew out as. Okay, so as far as how to set up your machine in the FAQ on micro chenille, there's a document that talks about that, plus in the video that we just linked to you in the comments. You can find that to answer to get the actual settings and how to get it running on your machine. Okay, but I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So for your particular example here, I would go through and digitize all these in the different colors, worry about, the pathing from one to another, all of that, the standard stuff you do with digitizing as it is. Once you're done with it, select all those fill and apply that chenille style to it. And then you just set it up as if it were a patch. Okay. So hopefully that helps a little bit. So what are your options when taking a DST file that's left chest size and making it jacket back size? Redo it. A DST file is going to be a punch file. It's not going to have any of the wireframes or the properties associated with it. So when you do large scales of punch files, it's not a good idea in general. They say, depending on who you talk to, I will say, scaling your DSTs, some will tell you do it no more than plus or minus 10%. Others will say you can go 30%. Somewhere no more than 25% larger or smaller is generally all right. Okay, because the stitches are going to get closer together the smaller you make it. The larger you scale it up, the more the stitches are going to spread out. Yes, the software is going to try to add stitches here and there to compensate for it, but the reality is it's not going to be the same design that was punched. Now, if it were in wireframe and it had properties, you just select it all and scale it. But when it's a DST, you really need the OFM file, the native to DesignShop, to be able to scale it within DesignShop, or whatever your digitizer did. You'd have to get them to rescale it or even redigitize it for you for the larger size. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because if you're doing something for a left chest, right, you're going to use a lot more small, thin satin stitches, running stitches even for fine details. Whereas if you're going to put that on the back of a jacket, well, now that area that might have been 20 points wide is now going to be 150 points wide. You're not going to want that to be a satin stitch because it's going to be prone to snagging. You're going to want to change that over to fills. So you make different design decisions for the larger items on the back versus a small design. So it's not as simple as just scaling it up. You really got to think about it and redo the design to be appropriate for the size you're sewing. Okay. So hopefully that helps here. So this one was kind of a multi-part question that was sent in. Good morning, Norman. All right, so this person says they had in DesignShop 11 Vector, I have 2 questions. Can you do element change with Vector? No, that's a design, so just straight up, that's a feature that's in that's in Professional. It's not in the Vector option. You also, so here, I made your tree real quick. So let's see, File, Open, Tree. Here's tree. Well, I made a version of your tree in vectors. All right, so I did this in a vector. One thing that you will have, while you do not have converge, if this is a vector, you still have options, right? So let me go change this security. So I'm using vector and not professional. That way I don't accidentally show you something that you don't have. By the way, you guys generally can't do that. This is just because I can't ever keep track which features belong to which version, because I always use professional personally. Okay, so let's go open my tree again. Okay, so I'm running right now just the vector option. So while you do not have that change element type, you still can convert this. So I can select all these vectors. So let's say I do it up here, and then I can click the convert button. Okay, and what that will do is put this in 3D so you can look at it. Now I've got a version of this done, right? So you still may want to change things. So for instance, this tree down here, maybe you want to add some, details along here, needle penetrations that show where the branches are and things like that. So you would just select your shape, click on your insert splice, and I can come through here and add needle penetrations where it crosses that. So if I zoom in, you can kind of see it. So you can add some stuff that way, or you can digitize it manually if you want. But if you're going for quick, you can just do a straight conversion. Now, one of your other question was, I'm getting a whole bunch of connectors between all these leaves, and I don't want that. Okay. So how do you get rid of those? Well, you notice on my screen I don't have them, so let me force the issue. What those are being driven by is from where one element ended to where the next one starts. How close is it? So what are your tie-in and tie-off properties? Okay, if this number's big, there, I just made it big to force the issue. Notice now I have these little connectors. I don't like them. All right, so how do you get rid of them? That's all in your properties, right? So if I select these 2 elements and I go into the properties, go into my tie-in and tie-off right here. So to get to the properties, all I did, I right-clicked and went to properties. That brought up this box. I clicked on the tie-in and tie-off. Okay, so if I deselect it, just click on this. Where this element, so where this one starts is where the green circle is, right? So over here somewhere. And where the previous element ends is where this guy right here is, this propeller. Okay, so if the distance from where one thing starts and the previous one ends is less than whatever number you have in this property box, it's going to just drag the thread and keep going. So it's going to leave that connector. Those are called connectors, right? So if I measure here, you can see that's 49 points. And since my number is really big, 49 is less than 120, so it leaves a connector. All right. So if you want to change that, all you have to do is modify your properties to be appropriate. What number should you be using? Some people like connectors, others don't. Some would rather grab their little scissors out and trim away, others don't. It's a personal preference. I will say personally, I set all of mine to 20. I know some of the guys at Melco like 32 better. So I set it to 20. That's kind of my personal preference. But 32 is the default in V11. So 32 is a good number too. Generally, somewhere between 20 and 32 is where most people find that if it's smaller than that number, you're not going to see it anyway. So you might as well keep your machine running at a higher speed. Okay. Okay, so how to make these leaves satin. So that was another question. So let's look at them. So first off, if I look at this one here and I want to make that satin, I can of course come change it to satin, and if I'm lucky, that'll work, right? But some of these bigger leaves, that may not happen. See right there. So when I just change it straight to satin, you'll see I've got some fill still going in here. And what's causing that? All right, so let's go into the properties again. Everything's driven by properties. All right, so if you look here, I have it set to satin stitch, but hey, I got this weird fill in here. Why? It's because right here, use fill for stitch lines greater than, and there's a number. So if any particular stitch going from one edge of your wireframe to the other is bigger than 80 points, it's going to make it a fill. And so if I measure across here, you'll see it's bigger than 80 points, hence the fill. All right. Now, again, that's practically speaking for your safety, right? You don't want to have a 1-inch piece of thread over a left chest, right? Because what's going to happen when you grab pens going in and out of pockets? It's going to snag that piece of thread that's really long, and your embroidery is going to get ruined. So what is the max your satin stitches can be? Yes, you can make them large, but practically speaking, 70 to 80 points is plenty. I know several people who won't make them any larger than 60 points. So personally, I would not go any wider than 80 points, and I limit myself to 70 points if you want a reference point. So how do you change this? If you, let's say you don't like that fill look. Okay, well, what can I do about it? I'm still in vector, so this is one option, I can insert a split line. All right, so how did I get that? Let me start again. Click on the shape. These right here are my editing buttons, right? So if I click on this one and hold it down, you'll see that puts a hole. I don't want to add a wormhole in my leaf, but maybe I want to insert a split line. So I can right click, left click, and now I added a line. Oops, hit escape. There. So now I added a line. So now it looks more like a leaf. It keeps it as a satin. Can do that. Another thing to keep in mind when you're making these satin is see the stitch direction. So let's say you want that running more kind of straight across rather than at an angle. The stitch direction is this dotted line right here. So how do you get to it? Again, select your shape, click on this thing right here, which is insert stitch direction. And now that dotted line is a black line, and now I can drag it around visually and look at it. So if you want to do crazy stuff, you can. We don't like that, or I don't anyway. Okay, so I can make some quick edits and make those fill leaves look a lot cleaner and look at its nice pretty satin stitches, and add that. What's another option for big leaves? So let's say I change this one to satin, and it's still larger than 80 points. So if you don't want to add split lines, you can always try auto split and see if that look gives you something you want. But when you use auto split, pay attention to your stitch direction, because that can give you that same kind of leaf look with a little less work, but you see I have to play with it to get it. I like the split line because this level of playing with is annoying. At least for me it is. All right, and plus when you zoom out, I think that looks neater than that. Okay, so you can always play with it to get whatever look you personally like. It's personal preference. We all are going to do things a little bit different, which is what kind of makes embroidery fun, I think. Makes it art. Okay, so did I answer change element type in vector? No, we talked about the jump stitches. So that's your tie in and tie out properties. So we're good to go. All right, this one here. Why does my design look thick, but the person who sent me the file, it doesn't? There can be a bunch of reasons behind that. You might be sewing way too fast. So that might be one option as speed of machine. Also keep in mind different machines can be set up different to auto compensate pull compensation. So your machine might be set up to add pull compensation while it's sewing. So that might be part of why it's making it kind of bolder, because all that's really doing is you're getting a wider stitch, which means pull offset or something like that's been added. In the properties, I think we have a link on where you can change the settings, the advanced pull compensation. You can check how your particular software is set up in OS on advanced pull compensation. It's a button within the settings. I'll see if we can get you a link to that. I don't have OS open right now on this computer to be able to show it to you, but I would start looking at the speed you're sewing, make sure your hat driver is appropriately adjusted and not too loose. I know Chris did a video on maintaining the cap driver, so that would be a good one to watch, to make sure your cap driver doesn't need some adjustments. And then take a look at the settings in OS, and are you adding more compensation than required? That's kind of where I would start on that one. I'd like to do some quilting on my Bravo. I want to use the same bobbin. So I've seen this asked in several groups recently on how can I wind my own bobbins. There's I think it's called the Simplicity Sidewinder. I bought mine at Joann's. You can find it at Walmart, Amazon. It's everywhere. It's a little box thing that you can wind bobbins on. Now, when you are winding your own bobbins, yes, you can match the thread. There are some disadvantages to it by using the thicker thread. The bobbins that we buy for embroidery are typically a 60 or thinner weight thread, which gives you more thread per bobbin. All right, so you can typically get, I don't know, 30 to 40,000 stitches out of a normal 60 weight bobbin. Whereas if you're winding it with 40 weight thread, you're going to get maybe 10,000 to 15,000 stitches out of a bobbin. So there is that, but if you want to match the back for freestanding lace or for quilting, it's worth it, right? So you can wind it using a sidewinder. A trick that I've always done is NEBS is a plastic sided bobbin you can buy. I buy them in the 144 box, the standard gross box, and I use those when I sew and save the plastic cores, because you can then take those and wind whatever thread you want on them. Okay. Now, if you're using the metal bobbins, keep in mind you're going to need the backlash spring in the bobbin case. You can find it in a typical style L, but just make sure it has the backlash spring, because those bobbins are heavier, and when it goes to pull to make a trim or sudden motion, you don't want it unwinding in the spool. So that's what that little spring is for. But yeah, you can absolutely use the same bobbin and wind your own. Just keep in mind you get less stitches per bobbin, and you got to find something to wind them on. My sewing machine will do it, but anyway. I'm looking to purchase a used EMT 16 Plus. Are there difference between that and the new models? Yeah, the EMT 16 Plus well, if you're buying it used, it's not going to come with a warranty, which the warranty is pretty darn cool. But ignoring that, let's see, it's got a different hook on it. The whole lower arm is different on the new models, right? So it's got a different trimming system and a different hook. The grabber and the thread tree is a little different. So there are differences with it. It's predominantly with the lower arm on the machine. So that's where most of them are. And depending on which model, the Plus, I can't remember if the main board is all new in the 217 or not. It might have, so the new models all have the new main board. The 2017, I would have to go look. I don't remember, honestly. Sorry. Anyway, it might have the older main board on it. Actually, no. If it's the Plus, it has to be the new main board. Anyway, sorry. So, yeah. It's just a different trimming system. I like the new trimming system. It's awesome. Okay. Can you go over how to cut a part of a design out that is a purchase design? Okay, so they fixed it. Yes, it is the new main board. All right. Can you use an empty magnetic bobbin? I wouldn't. I don't know. The magnetic bobbins I use are just a core. They don't have sides on it. And if you're winding your own bobbins, you have to have the sides on it. So if you're using, I don't know of any magnetics that have the plastic sides. So it's basically a core tied to the sides and then a magnet on the back. I don't know of that, so I don't think so. But if you have, I mean, you can always try it, but make sure you're using a bobbin that has sides on it if you're going to wind your own. Otherwise, you can get it too wide and then it'll bind up in the machine, and that's no good. Okay, how to cut out a part of a design that is purchased. Like to have it conform to a certain outline. So I assume what you're meaning is like when you're stacking things and you want to take out stitches behind it. I think. maybe not. I don't know. Let's see. I'll show you some stuff, and if I'm not answering the question you're asking, I apologize, and clarify for me so I can better answer. How about that? All right, designs. Trying to think where I have a pretty one. Things I've bought. I just want something with a lot of fill. That'll do. Okay. So I don't know. So if what you're asking, like if you've got a design and you want to delete the overlap, is that what you're asking? If so, it's not fun, but it's doable. So what you would do, so not that you want to do this, but let's say for some reason I have something that's going over here and I don't want to sew all this stuff underneath it. What do you do about it? All right, well, I would go through it, and what I always do is just select the shape, turn on expanded point editing, and then go select and delete these. Let me get back into Pro because I like those features. Security, professional, apply, yeah, I know, okay. Hey, Richard. I'll do that in a second with the group names. Let me quick do this. Okay, so where's my butterfly? Aw, gotta go find it again. Okay, so I got my butterfly. I'm going to select the whole design and rotate it because I want it normal. I'm going to draw a rectangle here just because, for speed. All right, so select what I need to delete from behind there. Come over here, click on expanded point editing. Now you see all the stitches. So right here I have this custom point selection tool. So I can now go in and draw a circle around stitches and hit delete. Okay, now keep in mind when you do this, I'm monkeying with the design, so I might end up having long jump stitches, which I can see one right here. So this is not foolproof, if you will, because I'm manually changing something, and whatever stitches remain, it's going to leave them there. So I might have to go add stitches or break an element apart, things like that, to avoid bad sewing practices. But that'll let you kind of remove things. Now, if your question really was asking how do you do like an outline if you want to turn this thing into a patch, let's say, what do we do with that? All right, so if I reopen it, I can go Object, Generate Basting Primer, change this to primer with whatever offset you want, and it'll conform it to an outline. Okay, now clearly that's that's not a patch, right? So now I have to modify it, but that at least gave me a shape that conforms to the outline of my design, right? So I could delete one of these, and now I can change this over to, let's say, a running stitch. So to do that, I'm going to hold the Control key and click on my walk input. So I held the Control on my keyboard and click on walk. Now that's a walk outline. So now I can take that, copy paste. So I did Control C, Control V, and give it a new color. So I've got my placement, my tack down, Control C, Control V. Now I want to change it to a single line. So rather than changing it with my Control key, here's another way you can do that same operation, but a little more controlled where you don't have to remember the hotkeys. Right here, if I click on what is this thing called? Change element. So if I click on that, I can go, all right, I want to make this a single line center and I want to replace it. Cool. So now I've got that. So now I can go into that one's properties and change it to a tackle stitch. And let's maybe make it wider to like 30 points. Okay, so now I've got my tack down. So now when I want my satin stitch, I just copy paste, move this down here, And now I can put this back to a satin stitch and maybe make it 40 points. Okay. All right, so that will let you create an outline of a DST or an expanded file. Okay, did that help? Let's see. Oh, you wanted the cut outline. All right, I didn't show that. So what you can do here is if I copy, oops, delete. So if I take that first walk stitch and I do a Control-C and paste it into a new file, Control-V, I can do File, Save As, change this thing to like an SVG or whatever format your particular cutting device needs, and save that off, butterfly. Okay, so now I have an SVG that I can send to a cut program to be able to cut it out, right? So you can do it on a laser, on a, I don't know, pick your poison, a Roland, a Silhouette, a Cricut, all that fun stuff. All right, so we had a question on Facebook, and I see one on YouTube. Angela, I'll get there in a second. Let me go do this one first. How do I create group names? One side that has first name, the second night that has the last name for karate belts. Are you trying to sew it as one hooping, or are you doing it as multiple hoopings? So that's a valid question. All right, so group names. Actually, I have a file. Names here. All right, multiple hoopings. Okay, so you would do this for, you'd create a file for your first names, and then you'd create a file for your last names. Okay, so I assume you're not going to do a logo. I'm going to leave this here just for argument's sake, just to show you some stuff, but you would basically create the name in whatever font, property, size, all of that fun stuff that you want, right? So to do that, you would just click on your lettering, change your properties, type in whatever you want, you know, scale it, whatever you're going to do to the size you want, all right? So once you do that, when you go into your properties, you come over to group names and enable that. Right here is going to be your list of available names. You can import Excel sheets, things like that. But basically you want to type in all the names you have. And you would add them to this list. Once they're here, and this is with group names enabled, you can move them over and say, yes, include that name. Or no, I really don't want Sam. Get rid of her. Oh, I got rid of Elena, not Sam. But anyway, you get the idea. You can move them back and forth of who's included and who's not. All right. So here you would put all your names, and then right down here is what's defining how this is going to save off and sew, right? So here, output type, design, name, repeat. What does that mean? That means when you go load this file, it's gonna be set up to be a whole lot of color changes, a whole lot of them, because it's gonna do the design and then the first name. Okay, so it's going to be the 4 color changes for this logo, and then a color change for the name, so that's 5 color changes. And then it's going to do the 4 color changes for the design again, and then the name again, and it's just going to keep on repeating back and forth and overlapping them until it gets through your whole list. So if you've got 50 names, 50 times 5, that's a whole lot of color changes, right? For this particular one. If you're just doing 50 names with no logo, then it's just going to be 50 color changes. All right, and they're all going to be stacked on top of each other, and it's going to look really weird on the screen. That's okay. Okay, because what's going to happen is when you save this, so if I go open this guy right here, so this, when you load it to your machine, this is actually what it's going to end up doing. I saved this as an EXP to force it so you'd see it, and what happens is you would take your karate belt, your shirt, whatever you're going to do this on that you have a name going with it, and you would hoop it, put it on your machine, and you would set up your color changes for the repeat. So if it's just a 1 color design, you'd put the 1 color you want and then a hold. All right. So it would sew that. When the machine stops, you'd remove that garment, put the next one on, hit start. It would go back to that same color and repeat the pattern over and over and over again. So if for this one that I have, I would set up my 5 color changes, and then I'd have a hold, and that would be my only color changes. It will repeat those 5 until it completes the whole thing. All right. So it's really as simple as setting up the file to, include whatever names you want under group names, and then making sure all the properties are right. The size, your underlay, your top stitching, all of that is set up to how you want, and you're good to go. So you would set up one for your first names, one for your last names, or if you're going to take one belt and finish it start to finish, you'll hoop and sew the first name, and then you'd hoop and sew the last name. You just set this up so first name would be the first. So let's say Chris was the first name and Richard was the last name. So that my first hooping would be the one side of the belt, second hooping would be the second side of the belt. So it's just, how are you going to run it? Okay. On YouTube, I'm very new to Melco. I have a EMT16. I do not have the design software. As a newbie, am I able to use software to digitize without any experience? So, yeah, so you need digitizing software. So if you're going to digitize, you're going to need the software. Otherwise, you're going to end up having to buy all your designs or send them all out to be digitized, which many shops do. Like I know some folks, they don't even digitize in-house. I do, but I like it. It's really, if you like artsy stuff, I find graphic designers and people like that pick it up really quick. Some folks just would rather spend their time doing other things. It's fine. It's, whatever makes you happy. But yes, you can absolutely digitize as a newbie. There are a lot of resources out there for you. If you end up getting DesignShop, what you'll find is there's a lot of content out here. So if I go to Melco University and then go to media, right here, there's playlists that just walk through all of how to use the software, right? So I've got the basics, and really these are designed where you start at the top and work your way down. So you go through basic editing and understanding properties and those sorts of things, which are very important. A lot of people want to jump straight into the digitizing, but I find it better to learn what all the properties are doing so you can adjust and work with designs that you know so well and tweak them to be your preferences. And then when you get into the actual digitizing part, these videos down here where you're learning how to create your column stitches, your fills, your satins, your walks, you're doing all of that. When you sew it out and you go, I don't like it because, I see too much fabric between my threads. Well, I would know that's in object properties. That's a density that I need to go mess with. Or, oh goodness, my thing is narrowing up so much. I wish I could make it a little bolder. Well, again, that's an object property of understanding. That's pull compensation. So understanding these properties play a lot into having a well done digitized design. And then digitizing is really just about practice. So a good thing to get into the habit of is when you see things that sew really well, study it. Look at what they did. How did they path it? How did they set it up to sew? What sort of underlays did they use? Because as you start noticing those sorts of things and building in your personal preferences into your digitizing, you start building your own style. So yes, you can absolutely do it. I'm self-taught. So I hammered at the software forever without watching any videos. So by the time I got to the software, I was like, oh, I was doing it the hard way. So I have a whole lot of that in my repertoire. There's, here, one simple thing. These things are flyouts. I did not realize that for the longest. So this particular column right here is a column 1. It's harder to use for most people. Most like the column 2, but I have a strong affinity to the column 1 because I thought that was the only way we could do columns for the longest. So, yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of good resources out there to show you. Okay. I don't see any other questions. Richard, did that help you with the group names? Angela on YouTube? All right. What else do we have? Can you explain the difference between the different tie-in and tie-out options? All right, so let's go look at, all right, so tie in and tie outs. If you don't know what those are, I like to call them knots. It's the lock stitch that's made, the tie in is the lock stitch that's made right when your machine is going to start sewing. Okay, so you typically don't want to just go, all right, start doing a running stitch. You typically want to lock your top thread and the bottom thread together so that once they're locked, now when you sew, you're not just dragging thread around. Okay, so that's your tie in stitch. Your tie off stitch is a series of stitches that lock your top and bottom together right before a trim. All right, so where do you get to those properties? So whatever you're gonna, everything needs to have a tie in and tie out, in my opinion. So here, if I go into the properties, there's this tie in and tie off, and you'll see we've got style 1 through 5. All right, well, those numbers are cute, but what are they? Let's look at them. Down here, you'll see there's a button that says show tie types. So let's see. Sorry, I just saw something follow up. Okay, so show tie types. If I click on that, right here, it's practically showing you what each tie off stitch is doing for you. Okay, so your style 1 is kind of an inline lock stitch. So let's start off with the basics. Style 1 and style 5 are true lock stitches. Locking meaning it's locking your top and bottom thread together. That's good. We don't like things unraveling. At least I don't like it unraveling in the wash. So locking them together is a good thing. Style 2 through 4 are not true lock stitches. So this is a personal preference. This is me speaking. I don't like these ones because what a style 2 does is it's a single back stitch and then it starts sewing. That's not a lock stitch. Style 3 is 2 back stitches and then it sews. The style 1, it does a stitch, it jumps forward half a stitch and back, and then it will sew over it all. So this is a lock stitch, these are not. Your style 5 is a really good stitch for your tie-ins, particularly on heavy things like applique, puff, hats, those sorts of things. It's very secure, all right, because it's an X. You know, you're locking those threads together. It's really tying them secure. I have a strong preference to using it as both a tie-in and a tie-off, but keep in mind, as a tie-off, a style 5 can be kind of ugly. It leaves a dimple in it, whereas your style 1 is more embedded within your sewing. So just to give you that example, if I zoom in on this guy here, I'll put it in 3D and change the color so you can actually see it. All right, so see this thing right here, that X? Notice it looks like a little tail hanging off my lettering. That's not a tail, that's the tie out right there. So the style 5, which is what this is set to, it's cute, it's very secure, which is why I love it, but it does tend to leave dimples in your embroidery or even tails hanging outside of your font, depending on the font. So if it's doing that and you don't like that look, you can always change it to a style 1, which is more in line, it's more embedded. People don't see it. Okay, embroiderers tend to notice these things because we know what to look for, but clients typically don't see that sort of thing. Okay, so that's kind of the short of it. Like I would, if I had to suggest, I would say use style 5 always for your tie-ins. Unless it gets really narrow, then change to a style 1. Your tie-offs, style 1s are great. It's nice and embedded, it's in line. Now, you do have the ability within DesignShop to create your own tie-offs, which is a unique feature. To do that, first you got to decide what it's going to be. Let's say you're going to do a Z or something like that. And you can actually punch it using a manual stitch. So this is not, don't do this, but let's say I want a lock stitch that looks like that. Okay. I don't see any reason why you would want one that looks like that, but let's just pretend you do. I can go save custom shape, tell it to be a custom tie, give it a name. All right, and say okay. Then I can apply that style to my element. Not that you want to, but you can apply that. Okay. So Thomas, you said it'd be nice to put some info on the live videos. Yeah, so they are doing that on the Melco service site. There's kind of like a key that has all the live videos with the synopsis of what was covered. So it's typically done after the fact and put onto the blog, onto that little FAQ section, to give the details. So that would be kind of a nice place to quick go scan through and see which dates you want to look at. I know we don't do that ahead of time for the most part because a lot of questions are typed in, so they like to update it, after the video, so they keep track of what actually is included. But that's a great idea. Thank you. Let's see. Natalie. Start. And then goes. Oh, all right. So, your description's really long, but I think I get what you're going at. So you're saying. So this question is involving doing like a large circle. So if I tell it to start and stop in the middle, all right, and let me rotate it just because I want to. All right, so if I tell this to redraw, you'll see what it's going to do is it's going to sew one side. By the way, that underlay is awful. And then it's going to sew back towards the center, all right? That's not a very good practice in general when you're doing with fills, because what's going to happen is as it's sewing, all this fabric here, particularly in the case like this where I've got awful underlay, it's going to be pushing all that fabric this way. And now as it's sewing this way, it's going to be pushing fabric, which in the end, I'm going to have a gap or a bump of fabric shoving up through here, which is not a good look, right? So that's because of the nature of how push works. Everything's moving, and as you're kind of shoving everything, it's going to move. Now you're shoving to something that's fixed. In general, you always want to sew away from things that are already sewn. So away from fixed things, which if you think about like a hat, you've got the brim of a hat, which is rigid, and I'm sure you've heard with hats, you always want to sew bottom to top, center out. That's because you're sewing away from things that are rigid, right? So on the hat, if I sew at the bottom and I push away, if the fabric moves, it's going out away from the brim and it's not pushing towards it, where now I'm going to have a bump of fabric there. The same applies here when you're doing large fill areas. If you're sewing towards something that's previously sewn, you risk having that gap, that push of fabric underneath there. That's going to not look good, right? So what can you do to avoid that? One is don't do underlay like this. Make sure you have appropriate underlay. So that's a good place to start. If you don't know what underlay to use, auto works really nicely. So if I, again, go play that, you can see, all right, now I've got some underlay, which is going to hold all that still and help avoid it. Okay, so that helps some, but I'm still sewing towards a fixed area. That may or may not be good enough, just fixing the underlay. Another is to play with these starts and stops, right? So I can change it to start on one side, stop on the other. So now when it sews, you'll see it does my underlay, and now it just sews from one end to the other. All right, so looking at the digitizing is going to be important on avoiding those sorts of effects. So let me quick go look and see if I've got questions anywhere else that I missed. Okay, I don't see any. So let me go back here. We talked about the tie-in and tie-outs. Oh, okay, so I'm at the end. Any other questions that you guys wanted to cover before I call it a day for this week? I don't see anything typed in. Hang on for just a second in case. All right. Well, we do these weekly. Next week is a bit hectic for me, so I've got to check my schedule, so I might have to get someone else to do it. Otherwise, I'll be back hopefully next week, if not 2 weeks for sure. Get whatever questions you might have answered. Hope you guys are enjoying these, learning something. Yeah, hope they're helpful for you. Happy sewing, and remember, you can always email applications@melco.com, and we'll try to get, whatever you want to learn, we'll try to get something made for you. All right, we're here to help. You guys have a fantastic weekend. I'm going to spend it out on the soccer field sweating. My kids, all three of them have games, so that's all I'm doing this weekend is watching kids play soccer. So that'll be fun. All right. You guys Have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you next week, hopefully. All right. Bye, everyone.